Hi, I'm Jason Burrows, and I'm here to interview Anthony Morris about the launch of his new online course called Surviving Yourself. In the course, Anthony shares some fantastic therapeutic exercises which anyone can use during times of both difficulty and anxiety. Hi Anthony.
Jason, hi.
Hi. How would you best describe the work that you do?
Okay, so it's a mix of self-hypnosis, but what I do in the talking sessions with my clients is to work on inner world management. And so that involves sorts of things like the way in which we talk to ourselves. So we attack the problem from two angles: the conscious, which is involved in the talking sessions, and then the unconscious via the use of self-hypnosis MP3s that I'll prepare specific to that client. And together with that, there's some interesting useful information, some philosophical, some nutritional and physical suggestions that I found to be very useful for both myself and for my clients.
And who would you say was your typical client, if you had such a thing?
Well, you know, depression, anxiety are rife, you know, and actually begin in very formative years. We live in England where talking about these sorts of things is not necessarily top of our agenda. The stiff upper lip and all of that, you know, has given rise to a serious problem both in this country and all over the world. And so it's really everybody and anybody, whether it's professional sports people who are under enormous amounts of pressure, or your average person who has a very general negative experience of life by virtue of the sorts of things they're telling themselves, and the complete lack in the curriculum actually of how to manage one's inner world. And as I said, for example, the inner critic that we all tend to suffer from to a larger or lesser degree really dictates our self-esteem, the levels of our self-esteem.
Knowing a little about you and your work, I know that you've achieved some great outcomes on behalf of people.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, again, it comes back to this sort of filling the space in the curriculum. Once people learn how to manage their inner world, which the inner world dictates your experience, your outward experience. And so once the inner world changes, your outer perception changes. And the brain learns quickly. So once the light goes on for people, that they are actually totally in control of both their inner critic and what's going on inside. And once they remember a few things that I sort of jog their memory of, they are guided to a state where they feel like they have their hands back on the steering wheel of their lives, which isn't the case beforehand. So they've got tools they can use that start to change their outward experience.
Now, I know that you built up quite a successful private practice based out of Harley Street in London. And I know that you've got patients continually going through the front door there. So, in a sense, why have you now gone on and created this particular online course, Surviving Yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I simply can't get to as many people as I would like to. In my view, the way that we deal with mental health problems in this country and around the world seems to be inverted. Insofar as I think we're asking the wrong question. We're asking the why question. Why do we feel like this? And the why question has no one single answer. There are innumerable possibilities, and we're never going to actually get there. I think a better question to ask is how. How do we do depression? How do we do anxiety? And then once we teach people how they're doing it, they can then choose to stop doing that.
For those people who take this course, are they going to achieve the same kind of outcome as if you're sat there with them in the room?
I hope to a very great degree. Clearly it's more powerful when there's a one-on-one direct interaction going on, and we can talk around all the little things that are presenting for that individual. So of course it's not going to be the whole effect, but the content is exactly the same. And I hope that, you know, because it's being filmed and there's video footage as well, that the individual will get a good feel for me, which I think is you know, probably the most important thing, because if there's no rapport between the client and the therapist in this case, you're not going to get any kind of result at all. So I think that while the content is exactly the same, yes, of course, coming to see me one-to-one is going to be a more powerful experience.
Great. And in the course itself, what kind of topics do you cover? So I'm coming to this, and is it fairly general, or do you actually tackle some quite specific issues which you think in your practice you've come across time and time again?
Yeah, so essentially, you know, what is presenting is either people who are suffering from depression or anxiety or both. And so the content of the course is designed specifically to speak to those issues. Now, where there are other issues presenting, then I would have to do more bespoke work with that individual. But fundamentally, we all do our misery the same way. And it's by virtue of what's going on inside our head and the way we talk to ourselves. So it's really about teaching inner world management, which, as I say, is missing from the curriculum. And this, at least, you know, in my view, this can be taught at a very young age, because the faculties which we use for visual and auditory hallucination are already up and running by the age of 4 or 5. Children start to talk to themselves negatively by virtue of the programming that's around them, either from parents in unhappy homes, and particularly that seems to be the case, that we tend to learn very much from our parents, our super programmers, if you like, how to do depression, how to do anxiety. And of course there's this reality that communication is 93% non-verbal. So if you're under the impression that nothing is going into your children because they haven't heard you saying anything or arguing or whatever, you're much mistaken. Actually, the largest part of communication between two individuals is the breathing, which is something that probably passes most people by. But actually, as we change our breathing, we change our physiology. So that's a very helpful tip for anyone suffering from panic attacks and that sort of thing.
So if someone is thinking about buying your course, what simple words of advice would you give them now, in the fact that they are obviously thinking of, you know, they've got stuff going on in their life, they're thinking, you know, should I, shan't I? What words of advice do you think you could give to someone thinking about purchasing your course?
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, I think it's brave of people to actually stop and take a moment to reassess and to actually reach out for help. And a lot of what stops people from actually going through with that is this idea that it's going to be very invasive, that it's going to dig up all of the rotten things that have happened to them, and actually leaves them feeling terrible. I'm operating in a slightly different way, in that, you know, we've all had bad stuff happen to us. But what people really want when they go for therapy is change, to learn how to change, to go from being unhappy to being happy. How do we do this? So what we're talking about here is a very non-invasive way of tackling and learning to manage our inner world.
Often one hears that, you know, people being in therapy for years and years and years, but again, knowing a little about your work, you seem to be able to achieve results in people quite quickly.
Yes.
Again, why do you think that is? So where other people take years, you seem to take hours.
Well, yes, and in fact, after the first session and after this first part of this course, there'll be a second part coming out, which will mimic the second session that I tend to have with clients 3 to 4 weeks after the first one. And the reason it's 3 to 4 weeks after is because it takes about that long to embed new habits of thinking. And by that time, the individual should be having a radically different experience. And why is that? It's because once they've changed what's going on inside, then, and the habits that they've become hardwired to, and the ways in which they've been leaking away their vital life energy, either trying to change the past, which is impossible, or trying to control the future, which is impossible, both of which are ego territory. And so a lot of it is about coming back into the now, which is where one can create a mastery of anything, positive or negative. So the people who have become unhappy have literally become masters of unhappiness, masters of anxiety, rather than the violin or tennis or some other useful, productive, positive thing. So it's the recognition of this distribution of our attention that allows us to change very quickly. The brain learns fast. It doesn't learn slowly over years. And once the light bulb goes on for someone around something, it's in. And even people with the most chronic conditions who've been doing their misery for 20, 30, 40, up to, I've had a client who was 76 years old. He'd been in therapy for 63 years. And unfortunately what had happened for him, because there was nothing wrong with him fundamentally, but at the age of 13, he'd been told by an eminent psychiatrist that there was something wrong with him. And that, because he invested in the authority, as we all tend to do, that belief stuck with him his entire life. And this was a chap who ought to have been a top-flight lawyer, fantastic mind. And when the light bulb went on for him, I saw a little smile come across his face. It probably hadn't smiled for a long time because he'd lived his life as a recluse. And 6 months later, I got a note from him saying he got married. And so all of those illusions that we've created for ourselves inside are shown to be just that, an illusion, and something that we can actually happen to. So we can happen to our inner world. We can actually do something about it, but as I say, the curriculum is devoid of this kind of thing. And the approach to mental health and recovering from mental health now is reliant on psychopharmacology and asking the wrong questions, the why questions, which there are no answers to, no definitive answers to.
I think you often sort of say that everyone does misery in the same way. Is it also true to say that everyone does happiness in the same way?
The same faculties which we use to create unhappiness can be used to deliver happiness. And in the end, actually, it's about how much happiness you can take. Yes, you can deliberately program yourself for happiness in the same way as you've inadvertently programmed yourself for unhappiness.
And is that something that you tackle in this new online course?
Absolutely, yeah. These are the contents of this first session, which are designed to turn people around then and there. There's a lot to take on board, but as you percolate and go forward and you start using these techniques, in 3 to 4 weeks you're going to notice a radical difference both in energy levels and your general experience, your general outward experience.
Well, Anthony Morris, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jason.
And I look forward to taking the course myself.
Pleasure.
Thank you.